I'll start with Sebastian Rahtz's Wikipedia page. He was born in 1955 and he died in 2016. He died of brain cancer, and he was a British digital humanities information professional. He was born in 1955. His father was an archaeologist, Philip Rahtz, and Sebastian followed his father's footsteps before moving into a lexicon of Greek personal names. And the digital humanities is really the main thing, I think, for him, and that TeX typesetting was one of the tools. From 1999 to 2015, he worked for the Oxford University Computing Services and finished his career as Chief Data Architect. And as I said, he died in 2016 from brain cancer. I can say a few words about Philip Rahtz. He was born in 1921 and died in 2011. And he was a pioneer of modern British archaeology and ran summer schools and excavations, and died at the age of 90 in 2011. I mention those things in part because my birth dates and my father's birth dates are similar to Sebastian's birth dates and his father's birth dates. And also that my father was a mathematician and I'm a mathematician, and I've stuck with it. And his father was an archaeologist and became an archaeologist and then digital humanities. So there's some elements in common there. In November 2016, there was a memorial meeting for Sebastian Rahtz, which I was pleased to be invited to. And Don Knuth sent a message to that meeting that was read by Antrophethian. And I'll try and read it out to you. SPQR was a major contributor to TeX for decades, especially as the architect of the enormously popular TeX Live distribution. I think of him as one of the main bridges between users of TeX in academic circles and users of TeX in the real world. Without his efforts, thousands of publications would have been poorer. It has always been a great comfort to me when I find leaders of the digital humanities enthusiastically enhancing the tools that I had developed, mostly with scientific applications in mind. A year ago, I wrote to Sebastian while planning a visit to Oxford and was naturally shocked to learn about his diagnosis conveyed to me with the help of his daughter. Surely his legacy will live for a long time. Best regards, Don. So that's transcribed from the podcast of one of the sessions at the memorial meeting, and I'll provide the link to all of those podcasts to accompany this video. I'll say a little bit about my personal story and how it's interacted with Sebastian. So I was introduced to TeX in around 1989 when somebody at my university gave an enthusiastic talk about it and showed us how to do the university letterhead using kerns and stuff. And I bought my own PC, and when I came back to this country, after some time, I wanted to make a living out of TeX. But before that, I joined the TeX users group in the UK. And before that, I joined the International TeX users group. And that's how I learned about the UK TeX users group. So I joined the UK TeX users group, I think in 91 or so, and must have been one of the first members. I wanted to earn a living out of TeX, and I was enthusiastic for XML, or rather HTML it was then called. And I wanted to do a number of things, one of which was build a community and have a standing in the community. And in 1995, I organized the Bridewell meeting on TeX, HTML, and PDF. That was held at the St. Bride's Theatre, which is at one end of Fleet Street. St. Bride's is the local church of the printing trade. And Sebastian and I were both on the committee, and he very kindly persuaded his manager, Martin Keyes of Elsevier, to be one of the speakers. So that was my first, so to speak, substantial contact with Sebastian. In 1998 or so, I was on the committee, and I was part of the committee that voted to purchase a CD writer for him. I don't remember how much it cost. It was hundreds of pounds. It wasn't £20. It was a substantial piece of equipment, and it was so that he could master the CDs, as they then were, for TeX Live. Regarding Baskerville, Sebastian certainly had the major role as editor and typesetter, and I was perhaps the production manager. I don't think I ever had that role. It was actually fairly menial. Robin Fairburns would print off on his laser printer the masters, one sheet a page. And I would glue these up onto A3 sheets and take them to the local Staples business supply company, and they would photocopy them and staple them up. And then, as I recall, I did the mailing. Perhaps Robin did the mailing, I can't remember, but these things came back from Staples and were put in envelopes and mailed. That process stopped when Robin had access through the computer lab to a Xerox DocuTech, which is an enormous machine that, what's the word? Prints small run breakfast, does short run print runs for breakfast. It's a pioneer, if you like, of the print on demand machines that are now very widely used. So there in brief is my involvement with Sebastian. I think that Sebastian and I were both difficult people, and I suspect that we both had difficult parents, and I got a very strong sense that he found a real home for himself at the Oxford University Computing Lab. And he has a real enthusiasm, not for mathematics, but for digital humanities. And in that respect, I think the Wikipedia article on him is spot on. His focus is in the digital humanities, and TeX was one of the tools. He was one of the key people in the TeX encoding initiative. The purpose of the TeX encoding initiative is to produce very good XML, or allow people to produce very good XML that can be used by computers for various purposes, one of which is rendering for human use. And he did the XSLT style sheets that allowed the production of PDF via LaTeX from the XML that was being encoded. And I think he would have been pleased that about the talks on the TEI and its relationship to LaTeX at this year's TeX conference. I think he would have been pleased at that. I sense, and I don't have any clear recollection or evidence for this, that he was a bit disappointed that the TeX community as a whole didn't embrace XML nearly as enthusiastically as he did, or for that matter, which I did. I think he embraced it because he saw in practice its value for the humanities. So much of humanities involves textual analysis, some of which is done by computers. A lot actually is done by computers. And my enthusiasm comes, roughly speaking, from my being a mathematician and appreciating the necessity of rigor in order to have successful transformations. So at that point, I'll stop, Joseph. Thank you very much for providing me with an audience. so that I could share these thoughts and reminiscences of Sebastian. And over to you if you have any questions or comments. I hope you do.
Well, I think you spoke very eloquently there, Jonathan. As I commented before, a little earlier before you started the main session, I know of Sebastian only by reputation because I started using LaTeX in the early 2000s, by which time I think his interest had taken him, his other interests had taken him other places. So we were talking that he did work on, as you said, he was the originator of a lot of the work on TeX Live, but that was handed over to Carl Berry and others. Certainly by the time I started using TeX, although to be honest, I started off with MIT-TeX, not TeX Live. So that's a parallel development stream almost, with a slightly different history. But you certainly see his impact in things like some of the LaTeX companion works. I think he's on the graphics.
Yes, he did a lot with graphics, along with David.
Yes, along with David. Yeah, he's on one of the other books as well. I forget. But yeah, so I mean, you highlighted his contributions well beyond TeX, and digital humanities is something that seems to be, as you say, heavily XML based. I follow some people on Twitter who are explicitly digital humanities academics, and they mention XML a lot, although I think they still use TeX as well. I guess the comment I would have there is I see what you mean about the TeX community and XML. I suppose I take the view that maybe you're using, you've mentioned David Carlisle, and he wrote XML TeX, and his own conclusion is don't do the XML processing using TeX, use something else to process XML using a dedicated XML tool and output TeX or LaTeX for typesetting if that's what your aim is. And I suppose I sit perhaps a little bit more toward that side of the thinking. But I thought it is a shame. Sebastian was taken from us earlier than is fair. I mean, as you say, allude to his Wikipedia entry and the fact that he was still working right up to when he got his final illness. He was not. He was hardly an old man. So I'm sure he had many contributions he could have made. Was he still with us? Not necessarily in the LaTeX world, but more widely in as you say, sort of structured data processing.
Can I come in at this point? The first is that I went to the memorial meeting, which is an all-day meeting, and I was amazed at the range of people and the range of interests. And all the talks were recorded quite nicely, and they're available as video podcasts. So as I said, I'll put a link to that when I publish this video. There's a contribution I didn't mention, which is quite important. Tug actually at some point got itself into a bit of a mess, and Tugboat was getting later and later and later, and I think there was a backlog of a year or more at one point. And as Tugboat is one of the major benefits of membership at the time, that was awkward and difficult. Sebastian was secretary of Tug, and he and I believe Michel Goossens, and perhaps Carl Berry also, did an enormous amount of work to reduce that backlog. That said, the Tugboat of a long time ago was, I think, a much, much better journal than what we have now. I think the quality of the articles submitted and the rigor of the editorial process is less now than it used to be. I used to have a great interest and enthusiasm for what was in Tugboat, and Don Knuth would write at least fairly regularly when he had something to say or something new. Now he tends to write only when there's a new version of tech, and we know that that's only every 5 or 7 years or something like that. So that was another one of his contributions. What struck me when I met him was the amount of energy and confidence he had, and I was somewhat in awe of that. He's a much more practical person than I am, whereas I think I'm much more of a sort of looking at the long-term point of view, and I think that probably caused some friction between us. But that said, I wish that the friction had been less, and it is it's not a loss for the tech community that he died early. It's a loss for other people. The loss from the tech community occurred when, in some sense, he separated from it around 2000 something. And I think one of the big causes of that was the opportunities he had that were much more congenial and perhaps more important to him in the Oxford University Computing Service. And from a career point of view, and I don't know that that was Sebastian's point of view, but from a career point of view, becoming a tech expert is unlikely to advance your career, whereas Sebastian's expertise in digital humanities surely put him in good stead for being a chief data architect with the Oxford University Computing Service. We could look at Overleaf, and I've forgotten the name of the person that set it up.
John Hammersley.
John Hammersley. He was something of a tech expert and a systems expert, but actually the big part of Overleaf, and it's been confirmed with conversations I've had with people who are not tech experts and use it, is the support it provides for collaboration and, for example, the integration with GitHub. And one of the people I know from the Open University put it this way: if you're collaborating with somebody, there's never any doubt that you're working on their last version. You're not waiting for them to email you the next version. You're always working on the current version. And that's a consequence of the integration with GitHub. So it was those sorts of things rather than solving the typesetting problems and the tech live and that sort of thing. So Sebastian's contribution to the tech community, I agree with Don Knuth's assessment, although that's not to belittle others' contributions, but the herding of the cats to create Tech Live, I think was a marvelous contribution, and it's helped unify the structure and allowed Don Knuth's dream or goal that two machines in different places at different times running different operating systems can perform exactly the same calculation, namely typesetting, and get exactly the same result. That was one of his big goals. And Tech Live is a big step in that direction because it provides a fixed point, just as Tech Live, just Tech itself is a fixed point.
I think I agree with you about. I mean, there are people who have made careers out of their tech expertise, but they are a very limited number of people. I mean, you mentioned Overleaf. I know people who work for Overleaf who have got in there because of tech expertise, but you see that most of their job adverts are in the web development, systems development side of things. And then obviously there are a few people at specialist typesetters who recruit people with tech expertise. I'm thinking of people like VTech, but they are there's a very small set of paid jobs where tech expertise is the major contributory factor. I think one would be foolish to set out to have that as a career. I think it's fair to say. Certainly, even if one did, I think you would also want to acquire other skills whilst on those jobs to allow you to do other things. So I think I entirely agree with you. I think Sebastian probably found that he had other interests which took him other places. He, as you said, he had a Renaissance man's range of interests, and I think that meant that he had lots of opportunities and he couldn't do everything that he might be interested in. He had to choose some areas, I mean, as we all do. But if you have a wide range of interests, you probably have more options. Certainly, if you're good at a wide range of those options, you have more opportunity.
In 2003, I was lucky enough, if you like, to find a home for my TeX skills, which is that the Open University needed to manage its TeX system that was getting quite old in the tooth. It had, in fact, been set up by Chris Rowley and others in the around the 1980s, I think, early 80s or mid 80s, and it was used for production of course materials. And it was using, they needed somebody who knew what they was doing, and they needed them quite badly because it was running on obsolete machines with obsolete hardware with an obsolete printer driver, handling the graphics. And I was hired in the first instance to solve those problems, and I did solve those problems. I rather suspect that I was one of the last people in the United Kingdom to be hired for their TeX solely or largely for their TeX skills. Maybe there's people in Overleaf that do that. I suspect that the skills that are more valuable is TeX training skills and TeX editing skills, and so to speak, skills around TeX rather than skills in TeX internals. Shall we get back to Sebastian and
Sure.
then say goodbye?
Certainly.
So I'm trying to bring him into mind as a person, and I think he could be quite reticent when he's talking, particularly if he didn't want to give an opinion, or particularly if he wasn't in support of something. And he had a lot of energy for doing things. I found that he could do things quite quickly. I don't know how that is related to his character or anything else, but as I said, I was somewhat in awe of him because he had a facility with things that I didn't have. And the summary of Don Knuth's assessment of his contribution, I think, is very, very sound. I thought that when I heard it, and I think it now. He provided a bridge between academia and the wider community of TeX users, and that made lots of documents better, and he needs to be remembered for that. Do you have any closing words, Joseph?
No, I think you've summed things up nicely there, Jonathan. As I said, I mean, you knew him as a man. I know him only from his technical contributions in the TeX world, and that is only ever going to be a limited view of someone. So I think that's a nice place to end. I think you've spoken very, very warmly. Thank you, Jonathan.